11 ways to silence your confused brain that refuses to reset. Your mind isn't tired, it's trapped. Trapped in loops of unfinished thoughts, flashing screens, constant notifications, and invisible expectations that never give you permission to stop. You tell yourself you're just tired, that maybe a few hours of sleep or a weekend off will help. But deep down, you know it's not fatigue. It's a kind of inner noise that refuses to fade. It's not the world's chaos invading your peace. It's your brain's inability to turn off the chaos it has learned to depend on. We live in an age where silence feels uncomfortable, where being still feels like a threat. Every empty second becomes a vacuum that demands to be filled, with scrolling, with stimulation, with thought. Your brain has been rewired by repetition to crave noise, because noise gives it the illusion of being alive. Dopamine, the chemical of motivation and reward, has turned into a manipulative teacher. It trains your focus to jump, not to rest, to seek, not to stay, to consume, not to breathe. The modern brain no longer knows what peace feels like. It's been trained to mistake distraction for productivity, anxiety for alertness, and exhaustion for effort. You've become fluent in mental chaos, and you wear it like a badge of honor. Yet, beneath all that activity, there's a quiet part of you that remembers something older, simpler, more human. A part that longs for stillness, not as escape, but as truth. This video is not about meditation or temporary calm. It's about reprogramming the architecture of your mind. It's about understanding what actually happens when your brain refuses to reset, and how to silence it without fighting against it. Because your mind doesn't need to be forced into peace. It needs to be taught how to return to its natural rhythm. Science shows that when overstimulation becomes chronic, your neural circuits get stuck in what neuroscientists call a high dopamine, low satisfaction state. It's a loop where your brain keeps seeking the next hit of engagement, but never gets the reward it's chasing. The more you seek relief, the less you feel it. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Jordan Peterson would call this the loss of inner order, a collapse of hierarchy within the psyche. Your emotions, your thoughts, your habits, your impulses, all speaking at once, with no structure, no leader, no silence. Descartes would say it's the mind that no longer knows how to think clearly because it has forgotten how to doubt productively. And Huberman would remind you that it's not a philosophical problem alone, it's a biological one. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of your rational thought, can't regulate when your limbic system is in constant alert. Your nervous system, wired for survival, mistakes your everyday life for a threat that never ends. That's why no amount of thinking your way out works. You can't outthink chaos using the same chaotic machinery. You must first quiet the system itself, the neurons, the hormones, the breath. You must learn the language of silence again, because silence is not absence, it's recalibration. So, in this journey, we'll walk through 11 ways to teach your confused brain how to pause without fear. You'll understand how dopamine manipulates your focus, how breathing resets your nervous system, how monotasking rebuilds integrity, and how boredom, once your enemy, can become your greatest source of creativity. You'll learn how to defragment your mental desktop and restore the stillness that once made thinking clear, deliberate, and alive. Because clarity doesn't come when the noise ends. It comes when you stop identifying with the noise. It's time to rebuild the bridge between your mind and your body, to recover the forgotten art of silence, not as a punishment for chaos, but as a reward for awareness. The invisible burnout, when your brain stops listening. Burnout isn't just exhaustion. It's not simply the product of long hours or emotional stress. It's what happens when your brain has been running on survival mode for so long that it forgets how to interpret calm. You start to notice it when even silence feels heavy, when you wake up tired, when focus becomes painful, and when your thoughts echo louder than your own intentions. This is not weakness, it's neurological fatigue. It's the brain's signal that its internal communication lines have collapsed. The invisible burnout is different from the burnout you can see. It hides beneath your routines, disguised as discipline or responsibility. You keep moving, producing, pushing, believing that stopping means failure. But inside, your nervous system is burning through reserves of dopamine and adrenaline just to maintain the illusion of control. What you call motivation might just be chemical survival. Every thought becomes a task. Every pause feels dangerous. Every moment of stillness becomes another opportunity for guilt to speak. This state is subtle, yet devastating. Neuroscience explains that when cortisol levels stay high for too long, your hippocampus, the area responsible for memory and clarity, begins to shrink. You stop storing calm moments as safety markers. Your mind no longer knows what peace feels like, because peace itself starts to feel foreign. The brain, seeking balance, replaces it with motion, the illusion that doing more will restore order. But the harder you try to relax, the louder your thoughts become. It's not because you're incapable of rest. It's because your brain no longer trusts it. Marcus Aurelius described this centuries ago. The mind that cannot rest cannot rule itself. The Stoics already knew that endless activity is not power, but confusion disguised as purpose. Burnout, from this view, isn't the price of ambition. It's the collapse of inner command. Descartes would frame it as a loss of clarity, where the will has surrendered to mechanical repetition. You are still thinking, still acting, but not consciously choosing either. Jordan Peterson often explains that chaos enters the psyche when your internal hierarchy breaks. When the higher functions of your mind, logic, morality, awareness, lose control over the impulsive and emotional forces beneath them, you begin to spiral. You live in constant reaction, not reflection. And the tragedy is that the world rewards this behavior. You appear productive, successful, even admirable. Yet inside, your brain is no longer listening to you. To silence this kind of burnout, you must stop negotiating with exhaustion and start observing it. You must notice the patterns that feed it, the constant checking, the mental rehearsals, the guilt-driven action. Because every thought that demands you keep going is often a fear of what happens if you stop. But when you finally allow your brain to pause, something begins to shift. The noise doesn't end instantly. It resists, screams, argues. But beneath it, another voice emerges. Quieter, slower, and infinitely wiser. That voice is the first sign of recovery. It's the awareness that you were never meant to live in permanent alert. When you hear it, don't rush to silence it with logic. Listen. That is your brain remembering its original language, stillness. The dopamine overload, why you can't find peace. Peace is not the absence of thought, it is the regulation of stimulation. And the truth is, your brain has been hijacked by an invisible chemical economy that trades serenity for excitement. Every time you scroll, check, refresh, or anticipate a notification, your brain releases small bursts of dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pursuit, not satisfaction. It's designed to reward seeking, not resting. The problem is that modern life has weaponized this system. You no longer pursue meaning, you pursue micro-rewards. And your brain, confused by the flood, can't tell the difference between genuine fulfillment and digital noise. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine is not pleasure itself, it's the anticipation of it. It's the spark that drives you to chase the next thing, the next post, the next idea, the next escape. But every chase leaves behind a chemical debt, a crash that makes the mind hungrier, not happier. You've trained your brain to constantly expect stimulation, and now silence feels like withdrawal. What you call boredom is actually your neural circuits detoxing from constant dopamine exposure. Think of your brain as a system of levers. Each moment of excitement, every like, message, or accomplishment, pulls one lever of reward. But the more you pull, the less power each lever has. It's called desensitization. Over time, your baseline of satisfaction drops, The same activities that once gave you joy now barely register. You need more intensity just to feel normal. This is why rest feels wrong and stillness feels empty. Your brain's reward system has been recalibrated to chaos. Philosophically, Descartes might say that you've lost the ability to doubt your own impulses. You no longer question why you act, you just act. You've outsourced your inner rhythm to the external rhythm of your environment. Notifications, deadlines, algorithms, endless input. The Stoics warned about this centuries ago. The mind enslaved to desire loses command of itself. Marcus Aurelius knew that distraction is not just external, it's the self fleeing from its own reflection. This is the tragedy of dopamine overload. It convinces you that constant engagement means living fully, when in truth it's the opposite. The more you chase stimulation, the less capacity your brain has to experience depth. You start confusing motion with meaning. You might read more, watch more, learn more, but retain less. You've become a collector of fragments, of ideas, emotions, and images, none of which stay long enough to form wisdom. To find peace again, you must stop feeding this loop. You must create friction against the dopamine reflex. Let your brain remember what stillness feels like, not as deprivation, but as recovery. When you stop chasing constant reward, something extraordinary happens. Your dopamine baseline begins to rise naturally. The brain relearns that satisfaction doesn't require novelty. It requires presence. Huberman calls this process dopamine reset, but it's not a one-day detox. It's a re-education. You start by reducing microstimuli. One less scroll, one fewer tab, one moment of silence before reacting. The goal is not to eliminate dopamine, but to restore its rhythm. When you slow the chase, you make room for serotonin, the neurotransmitter of contentment, to return. And when serotonin rises, your nervous system begins to trust stillness again. The irony is profound. Peace isn't found in the pursuit of it, but in the willingness to stop pursuing everything else. When you stop chasing the next hit of attention or excitement, your brain begins to rest by itself. That's the reset you've been searching for, reclaiming the default mode, the science of silence. Silence is not an absence of activity. It's a neurological state. Inside your brain, there's a network called the default mode network, the system responsible for introspection, memory consolidation, and creativity. It activates when you stop forcing focus, when you allow your mind to wander without purpose. This is the state where insights arise and emotional healing begins. Yet in our overstimulated world, this network is rarely allowed to function. You've replaced reflection with reaction, presence with productivity. Your brain has forgotten its own rest mode. Andrew Huberman describes this as the brain's idling system. When you disconnect from external stimuli, phones, noise, tasks, the DMN switches on, organizing the clutter of your experiences into meaning. It's the brain's version of deep cleaning. But when you deny yourself silence, your mind never processes what it learns. You end up mentally full but emotionally hollow, informed but not integrated. This is why you often feel overloaded yet directionless. Your thoughts are scattered because the system that connects them has no space to operate. Neuroscience confirms what the ancients already knew. The mind cannot see itself while it's in motion. Descartes would argue that true thought begins only when we interrupt the momentum of distraction. The Stoics practiced silence not as withdrawal, but as discipline, a way to create mental order by stepping back from the chaos of constant engagement. Marcus Aurelius would write in his private journals as a way to reset his mind, to let the default mode restore coherence to his inner world. When you enter silence deliberately, your brain begins to recalibrate. Alpha and theta waves rise, cortisol levels fall, and the nervous system exits survival mode. The DMN starts to rebuild the story of who you are, not the one society told you, but the one buried beneath layers of noise. This is not meditation in the trendy sense. It's biological maintenance. Just as your muscles need recovery after effort, your mind needs empty space to synthesize experience into clarity. Huberman often says that stillness is not passive. It's one of the brain's most active states. During quiet introspection, neurons connect across distant brain regions, forming the neural architecture of insight. You begin to see connections between your pain and your patterns, between your choices and your beliefs. Silence is not absence, it's data integration. And when this system is active, you don't feel bored, you feel whole. To reclaim this inner mode, you must first reframe silence as strength. You must confront the discomfort it brings, not run from it. Because that discomfort is the sound of your brain remembering how to listen. Spend a few minutes each day without input. No music, no scrolling, no conversation. Let the thoughts rise, then let them settle. In that quiet, something ancient reawakens, the awareness that thought itself is sacred when it's not enslaved to distraction. The modern world teaches you to fear stillness, because stillness exposes what you've avoided. But that exposure is healing. When you let the default mode network operate freely, you're not losing time, you're gaining depth. And with time, silence transforms from something you endure into something you crave. The body-mind reconnection, resetting through the nervous system. Your brain doesn't exist in isolation. It's a living extension of your body, and every thought you have is mirrored somewhere within it. When your mind spirals into confusion, your body follows with tension, shallow breathing, and an invisible readiness to fight or flee. Anxiety is not just mental chaos. It's the body's alarm that the brain has stopped listening to it. You can't think your way out of stress because stress is not just thought. It's chemistry. To silence the confused mind, you must first calm the body that carries it. Andrew Huberman explains this beautifully. The mind listens to the state of the body more than to words or logic. When your breathing becomes fast, your heart rate signals danger to the brain. Your limbic system responds as if you're under attack, flooding your bloodstream with adrenaline. The result is overthinking, a survival mechanism gone rogue. It's not that you have too many thoughts, it's that your nervous system never received the signal that you're safe. Descartes once said, "I think, therefore I am." But neuroscience adds a layer of truth he could not yet see. I feel, therefore I can think clearly. Without body regulation, reasoning collapses into confusion. The Stoics understood this long before biology could explain it. They believed control of the body was the foundation of control over the mind. Marcus Aurelius trained his breath before he trained his thoughts, because he knew peace had to begin at the physical level. To reset your nervous system, you need to re-establish dialogue between body and brain. One of the simplest ways is through physiological sighing. 2 short inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long exhale through the mouth. Huberman's research shows this activates the parasympathetic system, lowering cortisol and signaling to the brain that the threat has passed. When done regularly, this resets the brain's baseline and restores focus. Cognitive behavioral therapy builds on this principle too. Before reframing a thought, you must stabilize the state that produces it. When the body feels safe, the prefrontal cortex, your rational center, regains access to reasoning and emotional regulation. The loop between emotion and logic begins to harmonize again. You're not fighting anxiety anymore, you're realigning the systems that created it. You can't reset a confused brain by adding more thoughts. You must teach it through the body that safety still exists. Try a grounding practice. Feel your feet against the floor, slow your breath, and name what you see and hear around you. Each sensory signal tells the brain, I am here, I am safe. Slowly, the overactive circuits of alertness begin to quiet. The body doesn't lie. It carries every story your mind refuses to process. In tension, in posture, in shallow breath. When you release it, the brain follows. The path to clarity is not upward into more thought, but downward into awareness. Once the nervous system is calm, the brain can finally begin its true reset. Cognitive defragmentation, reorganizing the mental desktop. Your mind is like a computer that has been running too many programs for too long. Tabs open everywhere, notifications blinking in the background, endless files labeled someday. Each thought, each worry, each unfinished task consumes memory. And eventually, even the smallest command begins to lag. You try to focus, but your thoughts jump between windows. You try to rest, but mental tabs keep flashing open. What you call mental fog is often cognitive fragmentation, your brain trying to process more than it can organize. Cognitive behavioral therapy has a concept for this. Cognitive restructuring. It's not about eliminating thoughts, it's about reorganizing them. Your brain works best when it can categorize, prioritize, and discard what's irrelevant. But when you refuse to pause, when you never allow reflection, your internal files pile up. You begin to confuse emotional urgency with real importance. A single intrusive thought multiplies, taking over mental bandwidth. The more you try to suppress it, the more power it gains. Descartes might have called this the failure of clear perception, when the mind loses its hierarchy of truth. You start believing every thought is equally real, every impulse equally urgent. You stop filtering. The Stoics faced this too, but they built daily rituals to defragment the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote each morning not to express himself, but to separate what he could control from what he could not. That separation was the first act of mental clarity. Neuroscience now confirms what they practiced intuitively. When thoughts are labeled and reframed, activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, decreases. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, reclaims control. This isn't just psychological relief. It's a measurable neurological reset. The process of naming your thoughts, this is fear, this is guilt, this is uncertainty, literally reorganizes the architecture of your brain. Each label is a file properly saved, no longer looping in the background. To begin cognitive defragmentation, start small. Choose one thought that has been cycling in your mind. Write it down and then question it. Ask, is this thought useful or is it noise? Peterson often says that truth emerges from dialogue, not suppression. Treat your thoughts the same way. Bring them to the surface, interrogate them gently, and decide which ones deserve your attention. You will feel the difference physically, as if mental RAM has been freed, as if space for clarity suddenly opens. Huberman describes this as neural pruning. Your brain naturally removes connections that are no longer valuable when you consciously stop reinforcing them. Every time you release a repetitive, unproductive thought, the neural pathway that carried it begins to fade. What remains are thoughts that serve your goals and strengthen your focus. Over time, this process transforms your mind from cluttered to deliberate. Cognitive defragmentation is not about control, it's about order. You're not fighting chaos, you're reordering it into coherence. You're teaching your mind that it doesn't need to hold everything at once. That clarity comes from prioritization, not pressure. When your thoughts begin to align again, your brain stops shouting and starts listening. That's when silence starts to feel like structure, not emptiness. The discipline of monotasking, restoring neural integrity. Multitasking is not a skill, it's a neurological error. Each time you switch between tasks, your brain pays a toll in focus, energy, and chemical stability. Studies from Stanford and MIT have shown that people who believe they're great at multitasking actually perform worse, remember less, and experience higher levels of mental fatigue. The truth is that the brain cannot hold two conscious processes simultaneously. It simply shifts attention so fast that it creates the illusion of efficiency. But what you lose in those microseconds is coherence. Your neurons burn more glucose, your dopamine spikes erratically, and your ability to think deeply fractures. Andrew Huberman calls this fragmentation attentional residue. When you jump from one thing to another, Part of your focus stays behind in the last task, like open browser tabs that continue consuming mental bandwidth. Over time, this residue compounds into anxiety and exhaustion. You feel busy, but not productive, active, but not effective. Monotasking, doing one thing at a time with deliberate presence, is the antidote. It's not about slowing down, it's about repairing the neural architecture that multitasking dismantles. Neuroscience proves that focused attention activates a network called the task-positive system, responsible for analytical thinking and sustained effort. When this network is engaged, dopamine flow stabilizes, your prefrontal cortex synchronizes with the parietal lobe, and your cognitive endurance increases. It's like tuning a chaotic orchestra into harmony. Every time you resist the urge to check your phone, switch tabs, or respond instantly, you strengthen the very circuits that regulate attention and emotional balance. Aristotle understood this centuries before the science existed. He said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Monotasking is the practice of excellence applied to thought. It's how you rebuild neural integrity through consistent presence. The Stoics practiced this naturally. They believed each moment deserved the fullness of their attention, whether it was writing, walking, or breathing. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to do what is in front of you as if it were the last thing you would ever do. In modern terms, that means choosing one task, reading, thinking, writing, breathing, and defending it from intrusion. Each moment of deep focus repairs your dopamine baseline, retrains your reward system, and restores mental order. Over time, monotasking becomes a form of meditation in motion. Your brain learns to complete cycles instead of constantly opening new ones. Completion itself becomes the reward, releasing endorphins that calm the nervous system and restore internal satisfaction. Jordan Peterson often speaks about the power of bringing order to chaos, starting with the smallest action possible. Monotasking is that principle applied neurologically. It is the art of living in sequence, not simultaneity. When you allow your attention to exist in one place at a time, you begin to reclaim your sanity, your patience, and your depth. The path to clarity isn't built by doing more, but by giving yourself permission to do less, with absolute presence. When you do, the noise fades. Focus becomes pleasure again, and your mind remembers what it feels like to finish what it starts. That's not limitation. That's liberation. The power of controlled boredom, the forgotten state. Boredom has been misjudged. It isn't a flaw or a failure of the mind. It's the doorway to its deepest repair. In an age obsessed with stimulation, boredom has become something to escape rather than understand. Yet neuroscience reveals that this forgotten state is essential for restoring balance in your brain. When you allow yourself to be bored, your dopamine system resets. Your brain stops chasing novelty and begins reconnecting to imagination. The very silence you avoid is the space where creativity, clarity, and true calm are born. Andrew Huberman describes this as dopaminergic recalibration. Every time you resist the impulse to fill an empty moment with distraction, no scrolling, no checking, no noise, your dopamine receptors recover sensitivity. You train your brain to find reward in simplicity again, in breathing, in stillness, in thought. This recovery is what makes focus possible. It's what makes deep work sustainable. Without moments of low stimulation, your nervous system forgets how to regulate pleasure and motivation naturally. Philosophically, Descartes might say boredom is the mind's invitation to return to itself. When external input fades, the intellect begins to see its own patterns. It's a mirror moment, uncomfortable, honest, essential. The Stoics practiced this deliberately. They called it voluntary discomfort, the choice to endure simplicity to strengthen character. Seneca wrote that comfort breeds weakness because it prevents the mind from meeting itself. In modern terms, controlled boredom is a discipline of presence. the art of staying when every instinct wants to escape. During boredom, your default mode network activates, the same neural system linked to creativity and problem-solving. That's why many of your best ideas come in the shower or during a quiet walk. Your mind, free from constant input, begins to synthesize information in new ways. It's not idling, it's integrating. Every second of boredom is your brain reorganizing fragments of thought into coherence. Jordan Peterson often says meaning isn't found through pleasure but through responsibility and engagement. Boredom is where engagement is reborn. It's the pause before purpose. The more you learn to sit in it, the more powerful your focus becomes. When you stop chasing stimulation, your inner voice grows audible again. You start to feel time instead of fleeing from it. That's when creativity, introspection, and spiritual awareness awaken, not through effort, but through surrender. Controlled boredom isn't emptiness, it's cultivation. It's the mind returning to neutral after years of acceleration. When you embrace it, you give your nervous system permission to breathe and your consciousness space to expand. What you used to call nothing becomes the birthplace of everything that matters: thought, peace, and direction. The mind as an observer, detachment and cognitive distance. There is a moment, subtle but powerful, when you stop being the thought and start watching it. That's the birth of mental freedom. Most people never experience this separation. They live as if every idea, emotion, or memory that passes through them is part of their identity. But neuroscience and philosophy agree. Awareness is not the same as thinking. You are not the content of your mind. You are the consciousness that perceives it. The act of observing your thoughts without being consumed by them is what modern psychology calls metacognition. And it is the foundation of every deep reset. Andrew Huberman explains that when we observe our inner dialogue without reacting, the prefrontal cortex takes control over the amygdala, shifting us from emotion-driven to awareness-driven behavior. This small neurological distance changes everything. Anxiety loses its grip because it can only survive in identification, not observation. The moment you say, "I'm feeling anxious," instead of "I am anxious," the brain rewires that emotion into data instead of identity. You stop drowning in your own thoughts and start mapping them. The Stoics mastered this centuries before neuroscience could explain it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This wasn't denial, it was discipline. The Stoics practiced cognitive distance daily, learning to treat emotions like weather. Temporary conditions, not permanent truths. They knew that peace isn't found in controlling the storm, but in realizing you are not the storm. Descartes, too, though consumed by rational thought, sought the same awareness when he said, "I think, therefore I am." He wasn't glorifying thought itself. He was identifying the observer. The I am that notices thought, that questions it, that remains constant even as the mind changes. Modern psychology has rediscovered this truth through mindfulness and CBT techniques. By labeling your thoughts, you weaken their emotional charge. The neural pathways tied to reactive behavior begin to lose strength, replaced by patterns of curiosity and calm. This detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. You begin to understand that not every thought deserves an audience, not every emotion deserves obedience. You can feel sadness without becoming despair. You can experience anger without surrendering to it. In this space between stimulus and response, as Viktor Frankl famously said, lies your freedom, and that space is not metaphorical, it's measurable. fMRI scans show that mindful detachment lowers activity in the limbic system, giving the rational brain time to act with intention. Jordan Peterson often describes this as creating order out of chaos, not by eliminating emotion, but by giving it structure. When you observe yourself, you transform confusion into comprehension. You stop being the prisoner of reaction and become the architect of response. The observer within you is not distant or detached from life. It's the truest part of you, the consciousness untouched by circumstance, the still point inside movement. Learning to live as the observer doesn't mean withdrawing from emotion. It means participating in it consciously. You still feel, but you also see. And in that dual awareness, your mind begins to find silence. Not because thoughts stop, but because they no longer dominate you. You have finally reclaimed the throne of your own awareness, the quiet authority of a mind that listens more than it reacts. Neurochemical recalibration, the endorphin reset. Every emotion you feel is a chemical event. Clarity, confusion, joy, exhaustion, all of them are biochemical expressions of your inner world. When your brain loses balance among its neurotransmitters, your reality distorts. You stop feeling pleasure from what once made you happy. You struggle to focus, to rest, to connect. The reason is simple but profound. Your neurochemistry has forgotten rhythm. You're overstimulated by dopamine, undernourished in serotonin, and deprived of endorphins, the natural molecules of calm and satisfaction. To silence a confused brain, you must learn to reset these chemicals not through pills, but through action, breath, and presence. Andrew Huberman calls this process neurochemical recalibration. It's the body's way of restoring harmony among its internal messengers. Dopamine drives pursuit and excitement. Serotonin stabilizes mood and contentment. Endorphins bring relief, the soft landing after effort. When your life is dominated by high dopamine and low endorphin activity, you live in permanent chase mode, always anticipating, rarely arriving. The brain learns that happiness is somewhere ahead, never here. The reset begins with movement, physical activity, especially rhythmic exercise like walking, swimming, or controlled breath work, triggers endorphin release, your body's built-in tranquilizer. These molecules bind to opioid receptors in the brain, reducing pain, easing anxiety, and increasing emotional endurance. That's why a long walk often brings more clarity than hours of thinking. It's not psychological magic, it's biochemical regulation. But the real power of endorphins lies in what they teach the mind. They restore the connection between effort and reward. Modern life separated them. Everything became instant. Messages, food, validation. Endorphins, however, require patience. They are the chemical signature of earned peace. Each time you choose real effort over instant gratification, you reinforce the neural pattern that links discipline to satisfaction. Your brain begins to crave growth instead of distraction. Descartes might have said this: recalibration returns reason to the throne. When emotion and chemistry realign, logic regains authority. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They practiced temperance, exposing themselves to challenge not as punishment, but as medicine. Seneca wrote that comfort breeds agitation because it dulls the link between pain and progress. In today's language, that means without struggle, your endorphin system starves. You need controlled difficulty, cold exposure, exercise, breath control, fasting, to awaken the chemical resilience built into you. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that suffering voluntarily faced becomes strength. Biologically, he's right. When you engage with discomfort willingly, your body floods with endorphins, transforming fear into energy. The same system that once produced distress now produces calm. That shift is not spiritual metaphor, it's neurophysiology. To reset, create small rituals that merge body and mind. Wake with movement, breathe before reacting. End your day with reflection. Each practice signals to your nervous system: we are safe, we are alive, we can rest. Over time, these signals rebuild your baseline. The highs become less frantic, the lows less consuming. Your mind no longer depends on chaos to feel awake. This is the endorphin reset, the art of rebuilding pleasure through integrity. When you earn your peace through action, your brain learns trust again. And in that trust, silence returns, not as absence, but as equilibrium. The silence ritual, creating the inner laboratory. Silence is not an escape, it's a practice. It's the laboratory where your mind recalibrates and your nervous system repairs the invisible damage caused by constant noise. The modern world made silence feel unnatural, even threatening. But neuroscience and philosophy converge on one truth. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the restoration of perception. It's where your brain reclaims its structure, where thought reorganizes itself into meaning, where consciousness meets itself without distraction. Andrew Huberman describes silence as a form of neurological reset. When external input fades, your sensory cortex quiets, allowing deeper brain regions, those responsible for emotion, learning, and memory, to synchronize. This synchronization is what creates coherence. Your heartbeat slows, your breathing deepens, your mind stops scanning for danger. Inside that stillness, your default mode network awakens again, weaving your experiences into understanding. Silence is not passive. It's the most active state of integration your brain knows. Descartes would have called this methodical solitude, the intentional act of withdrawing from the external world to listen to the internal one. He built his philosophy from silence, because only in isolation could he separate truth from illusion. Likewise, Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not for the world, but for the quiet dialogue between mind and soul. The Stoics practiced silence as a weapon against chaos. They knew that a person who cannot endure silence will always be enslaved to noise. The ritual begins not in perfection, but in permission. You don't need a monastery, you need a moment. Close your eyes for 2 minutes each day and observe what happens. The first seconds will be uncomfortable. Your thoughts will rise like static, demanding attention. But if you remain still, if you resist the urge to intervene, the mind begins to reveal its architecture. Patterns emerge, repetitions surface. Beneath the noise, clarity waits. Jordan Peterson would say, this is where order is reborn, when you face the chaos within long enough for it to organize itself into meaning. Silence doesn't suppress thoughts. It lets them unfold until they complete their course. That's why those who practice stillness often report spontaneous insights or emotional release. The brain, freed from constant stimulation, begins to self-correct. It processes unfinished stories, unresolved conflicts, and hidden desires. In silence, healing isn't forced, it's allowed. Neuroscience shows that even short periods of intentional silence can regenerate brain cells in the hippocampus, the region tied to memory and emotional regulation. It's a biological proof of what mystics and philosophers have always known. When you stop filling the void fills you with understanding. Endorphins rise, stress hormones drop, and your perception expands beyond the self. You begin to hear the mind's true tone, not the panic of survival, but the rhythm of existence. Make silence your daily ritual, not as discipline, but as return. Let it become your inner laboratory, where you test truth against noise and rebuild your mind's equilibrium. Don't wait for peace to appear. Cultivate it through stillness. Because silence is not what happens when life pauses. It's what allows life to begin again, aligned, coherent, and aware. The return to clarity, integration, and renewal. Clarity is not a state you reach, it's a rhythm you relearn. It's the moment when the noise stops defining your reality and begins revealing your truth. After the silence, something subtle yet profound happens. Your thoughts no longer compete, they cooperate. Your nervous system, once trapped in loops of reaction, finds its cadence again. This is the return to coherence, where the brain, the body, and the mind begin to move as one instrument instead of 3 disconnected signals. Neuroscience calls this integration, the process by which your neural networks synchronize after a period of rest or introspection. The default mode network and the task-focused system, once at war, start to alternate in harmony. You think clearly, feel deeply, act intentionally. The result is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of structure. Your inner chaos hasn't disappeared. It has been reclassified, given order. What once felt like noise now feels like music. Descartes might describe this as the return to the clear and distinct idea, the mind purified of confusion, able to discern truth from impulse. The Stoics would call it alignment with nature, a state where reason and emotion coexist without contradiction. Marcus Aurelius saw this clarity not as perfection, but as participation in order, the ability to see things as they are, without distortion. And Jordan Peterson would frame it as the rebirth of meaning, the moment when awareness reconnects with responsibility, when understanding becomes action. From a biological perspective, clarity is your nervous system's proof of safety. When cortisol lowers, serotonin rises, and dopamine stabilizes, your perception expands. You stop scanning for threats and start noticing possibilities. The mind's attention shifts from survival to creation. That's why clarity feels peaceful, yet powerful. It's the transition from defense to direction. The fog doesn't lift all at once. It dissolves gradually, replaced by precision of thought and calm confidence. This renewal doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from processing it. Each stage of your silence, the burnout, the overload, the recalibration, was preparation for this point. What you've done is not self-improvement, it's restoration. You've taught your brain how to be human again, how to balance effort with rest, pursuit with peace. You've remembered that awareness isn't about controlling the mind, but understanding it, letting it breathe without losing its form.
Huberman says the brain's greatest strength is plasticity, its ability to change through experience. But he rarely adds the most beautiful truth, that what changes the brain most profoundly is stillness. Each time you choose calm over chaos, focus over fragmentation, truth over reaction, you are sculpting new pathways. You are physically reshaping the organ that once imprisoned you. That's not metaphor. That's transformation in its most literal form.
Clarity, then, is the union of philosophy and biology, of ancient wisdom and modern science. It's the mind finally seeing itself not as a battlefield, but as a field of possibility. It's when thought becomes precise, emotion becomes informative, and silence becomes a home. This is the return, not to who you were, but to who you are when your mind listens again. And from this point forward, the path is not about maintaining silence, but about living from it. Every breath, every choice, every act of awareness becomes an extension of that inner laboratory you built. The confused brain no longer needs to be silenced. It has learned to speak the language of clarity. The reset is complete.